controversial air crash conspiracy theories in 2020. Please subscribe. 5th Aero Air Flight 1285. The worst aviation disaster ever to take place in Canada happened on December 12, 1985. Aero Air Flight 1285 was a chartered plane flying US troops home from Cairo. It made a number of stop-offs en route, including one at Newfoundland. Shortly after takeoff on its final leg to Kentucky, the plane stalled and crashed into the ground. Everyone on board was killed, including 8 crew members and 248 US troops. The Canadian Aviation Safety Board was unable to determine a definitive cause for the crash. Their report suggested the most likely cause was buildup of ice on the wings, though 4 of the investigation team's 9 members filed an opinion that detonations of undetermined origin brought about catastrophic system failures. An Islamic terrorist group is reported to have claimed responsibility for destroying the aircraft. Witnesses in Cairo claim to have seen the troops' luggage left unattended, and the plane was loaded by non-US military personnel. A Canadian press journalist received an anonymous phone call from someone with a Middle Eastern accent stating that there were diplomatic rumors that the plane had been destroyed by the bomb. Les Filotas, one of the dissenting investigators, wrote a book about the crash in 1991. Filotas believes that so much went wrong on board the plane at once that only an explosion fits. He believes that the US showed an incredible lack of curiosity given the scale of the disaster. He also thinks that the US authorities may have known things that were kept from the investigation team. Despite so many unanswered questions, the crash was overshadowed by the Challenger space shuttle disaster, which would follow about 6 weeks later. 4th, the Helderberg Disaster. The Helderberg Disaster took place on November 27, 1987. South African Airways Flight 295, a Boeing 747, crashed into the Indian Ocean 9 hours into a flight between Taipei and Johannesburg. As Malaysia Flight 370 showed again decades later, recovering wreckage miles underwater is a difficult task. They were at least able to find the plane and recover some of it with custom-built robotic vehicles. The flight recorder was never found, and the voice recorder took 2 years to show up. The last radio contact from the pilots had told control that the plane was filling with smoke, and the debris revealed that a fire had burned at more than 600 degrees Celsius, 1112 degrees Fahrenheit. At the time, a Boeing specialist speculated that rocket fuel may have been carried in the cargo hold. The theory was plausible. South Africa faced numerous arms embargoes due to the apartheid regime, and it's believed that commercial flights may have been used to smuggle military equipment into the country illegally. The initial inquiry speculated that the lithium batteries may have caught on fire. South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, set up to investigate crimes from the apartheid era, asked forensic scientist David Klatzow to present evidence. Klatzow had been involved with the original inquiry and maintained a professional interest in the disaster. He noted a number of problems with the first inquiry, including a failure to interview all witnesses. Klatzow believes that there were 2 fires on board the aircraft and that it had been in trouble a lot earlier than official reports suggest. He believes that by the time of the second fire most of the people aboard will have been dead. He'd been asked to refrain from speculation about 2 fires in the 1980s. More damning, the tape from ground control which recorded communications from the plane during the early part of its flight went missing very early. Klatzow believes the pilot may have refrained from making an emergency landing before reaching South Africa as he was likely carrying illegal cargo. 3rd, the Mozambican Tupolev Disaster. During the apartheid era, South Africa's government made a habit of funding rebel groups in neighboring countries with governments opposed to the regime. The 1980s Communist Frelimo government of Mozambique found themselves in conflict with their neighbor to the south, and the South Africans had aided the anti-communist Renamo with whom the Frelimo had been fighting a civil war since 1976. In October 1986, The Mozambican President Samora Machel met with his counterparts from Angola, Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Zambia to discuss an Angolan terrorist group allied with South Africa. On October 19, Machel was heading back to Mozambique in a jet flown by a USSR flight crew loaned to his government. 15 minutes before it was due to land at Maputo Airport, the plane turned 37 degrees off course. The flight engineer was recorded as saying that the cockpit's VOR, which tracks radio signals from the ground, indicated that was the correct direction. Less than 12 minutes later, the plane crashed into the ground, miles off course. The plane hit mountainous terrains a few hundred meters, about 1,000 feet, into South Africa, killing 34 people including President Machel. The original investigation concluded that errors by the flight crew were to blame, and that they'd programmed their VOR to the wrong ground beacon. Many people remained unconvinced. In Mozambique, and in South Africa itself, many believe that the apartheid government arranged the murder. Prominent South African ambassador Abdul Menti has said he's convinced an electronic decoy was utilized to give the pilots false information about the maps and the region. It's a popular suspicion. The Civil Cooperation Bureau, CCB / was South Africa's government-sponsored hit squad during the apartheid era. In 2008, a former CCB operative appeared on television and claimed a beacon was used. Hanslau said he was part of a backup team with missiles in standby to shoot down the plane if the decoy beacon hadn't done the job. A second anonymous agent confirmed the story. South African authorities adamantly deny that they were responsible for the crash. Second Korean Airlines Flight 007. On September 1, 1983, Korean Airlines Flight 007 was shot down by a Soviet Su-15 interceptor jet. The Boeing 747 was carrying 269 passengers and had veered into Soviet airspace while flying between Anchorage and Seoul. The plane was 320 kilometers. 200 miles off its planned course when it was destroyed, and its reason for straying is one of the most hotly debated in aviation history. The immediate reaction from the USSR was to deny knowledge of the plane. When they eventually admitted shooting it down, they claimed the plane was on a US spying mission. A report released in the 1990s confirmed the Soviets had no evidence for that theory. The actions of the US government suggested they may have had something to hide. However, they killed an investigation by the National Transportation Safety Board (NTSB) and requested the International Civil Aviation Organization investigate the crash instead. The NTSB had powers to subpoena documents and witnesses that the ICAO could only ask for nicely. Some believe that American intelligence agencies had monitored the flight of KA-007 on radar and failed to take any action to alert anyone. The ICAO concluded that error by the flight crew was the cause for the flight straying. Many people think this is unlikely, as the flight crew had multiple pieces of navigation equipment that would have alerted them to the issue. The plane was carrying a US Congressman, Larry P. McDonald, who was a vocal anti-communist. It's been suggested that McDonald was a target and the USSR electronically lowered the plane off course. Another theory suggests that the plane was flown off course to probe Soviet air defenses for US intelligence services. It's even been suggested that the US arranged for the plane to be shot down on purpose, in order to create stronger anti-Soviet sentiment around the globe. The Soviet leader, Yuri Andropov, called it a sophisticated provocation masterminded by the U.S. Special Services. No full bodies were ever found, though the Soviets were able to recover some footwear and a few small pieces of human remains. They also found the cockpit voice recorder and released a transcript. It was 10 years before Russia released the actual recordings. The families of the victims continue to fight. The father of a woman killed in the flight said knowing for certain would have been so much better. First Mull of Kintyre crash. The deadliest peacetime helicopter accident in the history of the RAF took place on June 2, 1994. a canoe en route to Inverness from Northern Ireland crashed into the Mull of Kintyre, killing all 29 people on board. The passengers were 25 senior intelligence officials on their way to a security conference. An internal report originally declared the cause of the crash to be a mistake by the pilots, who were said to have been negligent to a gross degree. The families of the pilots didn't believe that. They believed that the RAF had spent a lot of money installing a deficient computerized control system, despite being warned against it by the USAF. They believed the pilots had been made a scapegoat in order to save face. A lawyer for the family of one of the pilots found that the initial RAF investigation had found no fault with the pilots, but had been later altered by senior officers. In 2010, an internal Ministry of Defense document was leaked describing the software as positively dangerous. In May that year, the Defense Secretary ordered a review of the evidence. In 2011, the judge in charge of the review concluded there wasn't evidence with which to blame the pilots. He hoped the conclusion would bring an end to this very sad chapter by removing the stain on the reputations of the two pilots. Some people believe there's an even darker conspiracy than an attempt to cover up deadly decision-making. Some loyalists in the Northern Ireland conflict believe that many of the people on board knew things that would be a threat to the peace process and had to be taken out to keep both sides at ease. Thanks for watching.